The workshop is silent, but something stirs in the air. Dorian Kane, a mechanic struggling to survive on the desolate planet of Arenas 9, discovers a cyborg in the wreckage, Ilara, a woman made of both metal and flesh. She's not just any machine. Her systems are beyond anything Dorian has ever seen. As he restores her, a deep connection forms between them, one that neither of them expected. But when Ilara's past comes knocking, threatening to tear them apart, Dorian must decide, will he fight to protect the woman he's come to love, or will her creators take her back? The tension rises as they're forced to face an impossible choice. Can they escape their pasts and find freedom, or will they be pulled back into the darkness that wants to find them? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The twin suns of Arenas 9 blaze down, their scorching light casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The planet, once a bustling mining colony, had fallen into decay after the mining operation failed, leaving behind a wasteland of abandoned machinery and forgotten technology. The air was thick with dust, and the acrid smell of burned metal, a harsh reminder of the planet's former purpose. Amid the wreckage, a lone figure trudged through the rubble, his protective suit creaking with every step. Dorian Kane had been on Arenas 9 for years. An engineer and mechanic by trade, he had made the abandoned junkyard his home. The work was tough, but it paid the bills, or at least it did when the city's power grid still ran. Now everything was a constant struggle, with little hope of ever finding anything of true value. But Dorian didn't mind. He'd learned to survive in this broken world, scavenging for parts that no one else wanted, fixing old machinery that others had discarded. To him, it was a way of life, and he had learned to make do with what little he had. Today, however, was different. Dorian's scanner beeped loudly, its erratic display catching his attention. He paused, wiping the sweat from his brow and adjusting his tool belt. Something wasn't right. The energy signature on his device was unlike anything he'd encountered before. It wasn't the usual junk. This was something alive, something that shouldn't be buried in a scrapyard. He narrowed his eyes and followed the signal, weaving through towering piles of old mining equipment and broken shuttles. As Dorian ventured deeper into the junkyard, the signal grew stronger. His curiosity pushed him forward, even as the burning suns above beat down relentlessly on his back. He rounded a corner and came to an abrupt stop. There, half buried under a pile of twisted metal, lay a figure, a woman, but not just any woman. She was something else entirely. Dorian's breath caught in his throat as he knelt beside her. Her skin was a soft violet hue, shimmering faintly in the light, and her copper-colored hair spilled across the ground like liquid metal. The most striking feature, however, was the way her body was a seamless blend of flesh and machine. Her cybernetic form was far more advanced than anything Dorian had ever seen. This wasn't some mass-produced robot. This was something extraordinary. Well, aren't you something special? Dorian murmured to himself, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of her limbs. He could tell from the craftsmanship that she wasn't just a simple machine. There was something elegant, almost regal, in the way her body had been built. Despite the visible damage to her systems, her core seemed to be intact, though it was clear she'd been abandoned, left to die in the wreckage. Dorian hesitated for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of the risks involved. Could he repair her? Would it be worth the trouble? But something in him, something deeper than logic or practicality, told him he couldn't just leave her there. There was a quiet dignity in her, even in her broken state. He couldn't turn his back on her, not when there was still a chance to bring her back. Not like I've got anything better to do. Dorian muttered under his breath, his decision made. He began carefully clearing away the debris, working slowly and deliberately. It took hours, but eventually, he managed to get her into his hover truck. He secured her carefully, making sure not to cause any more damage to her delicate systems. As he looked down at her face, even in her powered-down state, he found himself staring. There was something hauntingly beautiful about her, something that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. Dorian shook himself out of his daze and climbed into the driver's seat. The truck's engine sputtered to life and they began the slow journey through the neon-lit streets of New Providence, a once thriving city that now felt more like a ghost town. The streets were lined with faded advertisements and broken-down vehicles. Dorian's workshop, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, was the only place he could truly call home. It was far from perfect, but it was his sanctuary, the place where he could escape the chaos of the world. When he arrived, the security system recognized his approach and opened the reinforced doors with a grinding noise. Inside, Dorian transferred the cyborg woman from the truck to his workbench. The dim lights flickered as he laid her out, carefully beginning to examine the damage. The more he worked, the more impressed he became. Her systems were complex, far beyond what he was used to, but there was a beauty to it. It wasn't just machinery, it was art. Dorian set to work immediately, his hands moving with practiced ease as he assessed the damage. Her hybrid body was more than just a combination of metal and flesh. It was a fusion of two worlds, two ways, of being organic and synthetic, seamlessly integrated into something that should have been impossible. Dorian marveled at the technology, trying to understand how such a delicate balance had been achieved. Hours passed as Dorian carefully repaired her most critical systems, ensuring that her organic parts remained intact. As he worked, he couldn't help but feel a connection to her even though she was unconscious. There was something in her that called to him, something that made him want to protect her, to help her. He could sense that she wasn't just a machine, she was something more, something that had been discarded and forgotten, just like the planet they were on. With a sigh, Dorian wiped the sweat from his brow and stepped back from his work. It was late, the first light of dawn creeping through the grimy windows of the workshop. He hesitated for a moment before reaching for the activation switch. He took a deep breath and pressed it, his heart racing with anticipation. The cyborg's eyes fluttered open. Her irises were a swirling silver, and for a moment she and Dorian simply stared at each other in silence. The sound of her soft breath filled the room, and Dorian found himself mesmerized by the intensity of her gaze. "Hello," she said, her voice melodic and soothing, a strange contrast to the harsh world outside. "I'm Alara." Dorian smiled, his heart racing. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Alara. I'm Dorian Kane, and you've got quite a story to tell, I bet." As Alara's eyes focused on him, a flicker of recognition passed through them. But there was something else. Curiosity, confusion, and perhaps, just perhaps, a sense of hope. The workshop was silent save for the soft hum of the overhead lights and the faint sound of Alara's breath, still adjusting to the new influx of energy coursing through her systems. Dorian leaned against the workbench, watching her carefully. He was no stranger to machines, to repairing them, to reviving their lifeless parts. But this was different. There was something almost alive in the way Alara's synthetic skin shimmered beneath the dim lights. Something far more than mechanical. Alara's silver eyes locked onto Dorian's, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of something akin to recognition, but it was quickly replaced by a calm, almost serene curiosity. Her voice was still soft, but there was a new clarity in it as she spoke again. "Where am I?" she asked, her words slow and deliberate. "What happened?" Dorian hesitated. He hadn't expected her to wake so soon. Her systems had barely stabilized, and yet there she was, alive, aware, and seemingly as functional as she had been before. The damage. He took a deep breath, pushing his thoughts aside. "You're in my workshop," he replied, his voice steady but betraying a trace of emotion he couldn't quite control. "I found you in the wreckage of an old mining colony. You were, well, broken. I've been working on you for hours." He saw her register his words, her gaze flickering briefly to her own body. She flexed her fingers slowly, testing her newly restored limbs. For a moment there was only silence, the soft whirring of her cybernetic systems and the occasional beep of diagnostic equipment filling the space between them. Then, she smiled. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A gesture that seemed so natural, yet so foreign coming from a being like her. Dorian couldn't help but return it, his lips curving upwards despite himself. "You did this?" she asked, her tone tinged with awe. "You fixed me." Dorian's gaze softened. "Not just fixed you. I've improved you. Your systems, your neural connections, they're not just operational. They're enhanced." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the intricate layers of her cybernetic mind processing his words. "Enhanced," she repeated, tasting the word. "Why?" Dorian scratched the back of his head, the simple act betraying the uncertainty he felt. He hadn't quite figured it out himself. "Because you deserved it," he finally said, voice low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "Because I saw something in you. Not just a machine. I saw someone worth saving." Her gaze softened at his words, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside the workshop continued on, indifferent to the two of them, but inside there was something different. Something that Dorian couldn't quite put his finger on. "You're not like any machine I've ever seen," he added after a long pause, looking at her with newfound wonder. "You're real. Not just a cyborg. You're something more." Ilara tilted her head slightly as though processing the compliment. She flexed her fingers again, the metal and flesh intertwining with each subtle movement. "And what do you think I am?" she asked, her voice still carrying that same melodic quality. Dorian felt his chest tighten. He had no answer. What was she? Just a machine, a human-like construct, or something else entirely? "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I'm going to find out." There was another long silence before Ilara spoke again, this time in a more contemplative tone. "My memories are fragmented," she said, her silver eyes clouding for a moment. "I remember being created, designed, but I also remember something else. Feelings, emotions, things I wasn't supposed to have. When I was discarded, I thought those parts of me would disappear, but they didn't." Dorian nodded, his heart sinking at her words. He knew what it was like to be forgotten, to be discarded. He had spent years fixing broken machines, abandoned by their owners when they no longer served a purpose. He had never realized how much he'd understood that feeling, until now. Until her. "You're not just an object," Dorian said, his voice firm now, the conviction in his words clear. "You're not a tool or a weapon. You're a person, Ilara. You deserve to feel, to live." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was no mask, no facade, just raw vulnerability. "But how can I live when I'm only half alive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dorian swallowed hard. "Because you're more than that. I can see it in you." Ilara's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, Dorian could have sworn he saw a spark of hope in her eyes. A hope that she hadn't had in years. A hope that maybe she wasn't just a discarded cyborg after all. Her gaze flickered down to the workbench, where the tools lay scattered, a sign of the progress Dorian had made. "Will you teach me how to feel again?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Dorian hesitated, the weight of her question settling on him. He wasn't sure what the future held, what this strange connection between them meant, but he knew, one thing for certain, he would try. For her. "I will," he said firmly. "I'll teach you everything I can." As the workshop's dim lights flickered above them, a sense of quiet determination filled the space. They had both been broken in different ways, Dorian by the loss of his old life, Ilara by being cast aside like scrap. But in that moment, standing together amidst the wreckage, they both realized they had found something worth saving. Something worth fighting for. And in the days that followed, as Dorian continued his delicate work on her systems, Ilara began to change. She wasn't just a machine being repaired. She was learning, growing, and most importantly, she was feeling again. Dorian couldn't quite explain it, but he was starting to feel it too. There was something in the way she looked at him, something in the way they worked together, something that told him they were no longer just two lost souls in a desolate world. They were beginning to find their way back to life, back to hope. The morning after Ilara's awakening, Dorian found himself standing in the middle of his workshop, surrounded by parts and tools strewn about in a haphazard mess. His hands were covered in grease, his hair a mess from hours of tinkering, but his mind was far from the usual mechanical puzzles he encountered. Today, his thoughts were on Ilara, her unique combination of organic and synthetic parts, and the remarkable potential she held. It wasn't just about fixing broken machines anymore. No, this was something far more complicated, something that tugged at something deep inside him. Ilara's eyes fluttered open slowly as the soft morning light filtered through the dirty windows of the workshop. The first thing she noticed was the feeling, the sensation of warmth, the softness of the air against her skin. For so long she had been nothing more than a tool, an object, an experiment in a lab. And yet here she was, alive. She could feel. Her eyes darted around the workshop, taking in the worn-out walls, the scattered tools, the faint smell of oil and metal. This wasn't a place of glamour or luxury, but it was a place that felt safe. "Morning," Dorian said from across the room, offering a tired but warm smile. He had been so focused on his work that he hadn't realized how much time had passed since Ilara's systems had first activated. It was clear that something had changed in the way he looked at her, something more than just the mechanical parts that had been his focus. "Good morning," Ilara replied, her voice smooth, but still carrying that hint of curiosity. She sat up slowly, carefully adjusting her weight as she felt the coolness of the metal beneath her, feeling the slight hum of her own systems as they worked in sync with her organic components. Her mind, still disoriented from the years of disrepair and malfunction, slowly began to make sense of her new surroundings. She could feel every vibration, every sensation in her limbs, and the warmth of the sunlight on her skin. But the most intense feeling was one that she couldn't quite place, something that seemed to pull her toward Dorian. "I feel..." Ilara trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Her silver eyes met his, searching for something she hadn't yet found. "I feel different, like I'm awake for the first time in years." Dorian nodded, stepping closer to her. "You are awake. I fixed you, but I also gave you something more. I enhanced your sensory systems so you could experience everything, every touch, every sensation, the way it was meant to be." Her gaze softened as she processed his words, her mind working to comprehend the changes. She reached for the edge of the workbench and pulled herself to her feet, her limbs steady but unfamiliar. Her body, both organic and mechanical, felt more responsive than ever. She could feel the slight tension in her muscles, the way the air felt against her synthetic skin, the weight of the world around her. It was as if every little detail was suddenly alive with meaning. Dorian watched her, his brow furrowed in concentration. "How do you feel? Are the adjustments working? Can you feel everything clearly?" Ilara closed her eyes for a moment as if to better focus on her own sensations. Then she opened them again, her eyes glinting with a mixture of surprise and wonder. "I feel it all," she said softly, her voice almost breathless. "The warmth of the sun, the texture of the floor beneath me. It's like everything is alive now, like I'm really here." Dorian smiled, a deep sense of satisfaction filling him. "I knew you could feel it. You're not just a machine, Ilara. You're something more. You're alive, and I'm going to help you make the most of it." Ilara's heart, a piece of machinery designed to mimic a human organ, fluttered at his words. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but something inside her stirred. Dorian wasn't just fixing her, he was giving her life. As she took a few cautious steps around the workshop, Ilara marveled at how smoothly her systems worked. She could feel the soft click of each step as her body moved, the faint pulse of electricity running through her circuits. It was a dance between flesh and steel, a blend of organic and synthetic that created something extraordinary. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just an object. She was a person. Someone. "I owe you everything," she whispered, turning toward Dorian. There was no trace of the cold, mechanical tone she had used when first activated. She spoke with emotion, with a depth she had never known. "You gave me back my life." Dorian's heart skipped a beat as he met her gaze. There was something in her eyes that he hadn't expected. Something that went beyond gratitude. Something raw. Something real. He stepped closer, unable to keep the distance between them. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "You deserve this. You deserve to feel. You deserve to live, Ilara. I just helped you see that." There was a moment of silence between them, the air thick with unspoken words. Ilara reached out, hesitating just for a second before touching his hand. The warmth of his skin sent a jolt through her, the sensation clear and undeniable. It was more than just a touch. It was a connection, a spark between them that felt real, something deeper than just mechanical calibration. "I don't know what this is," Ilara said, her voice shaky. "But I want to understand. I want to feel everything. Everything you've shown me and more." Dorian looked down at her hand in his pulse quickening. For a moment, he was unsure of what to say. His mind raced, his heart in his throat. He had always thought of himself as a mechanic, someone who fixed broken things. But this felt different. Ilara wasn't just a project. She wasn't something to be fixed. She was someone to be understood, to be cared for. "I'll help you," Dorian said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I'll help you understand it. We'll figure this out together." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Dorian and Ilara stood side by side in the heart of the workshop. The world outside continued, oblivious to the quiet transformation taking place within these walls. But for Dorian and Ilara, this was just the beginning. A new chapter had started. A chapter where they would explore not just the limits of technology, but the depths of emotion, connection, and love. And as Ilara looked up at him, her silver eyes shimmering with a new light, Dorian knew one thing, for certain. There was no going back. Together, they would forge a new path, one that would change their lives forever. As days turned into weeks, Dorian and Ilara's bond grew stronger. The workshop, once a place of solitude and mechanical repairs, had transformed into something far more vibrant. It had become a space where they shared their thoughts, their dreams, and even their doubts. For the first time in years, Dorian felt like he wasn't just repairing broken machines. He was building something real, something that could change everything. Ilara, for her part, had started to adapt to her enhanced body, her senses now so sharp that the world seemed to come alive in ways she had never imagined. Every sensation was more vivid. Every sound, every color, every touch felt amplified. Her once cold mechanical systems had blossomed into something that connected her to the world, and, most importantly, to Dorian. She no longer saw herself as a discarded cyborg, left behind in the wreckage. With Dorian's help, she had become something entirely new, a blend of the organic and the synthetic, but more than the sum of its parts. Yet despite her new life, there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she wasn't truly free. Ilara had been a product, a tool made for someone else's use. Even though Dorian had given her the ability to feel and live again, there was a constant reminder of her origins, of the purpose she had been created to serve. And it troubled her. One evening, as the stars twinkled overhead, Dorian noticed that Ilara was unusually quiet. She stood by the open window of the workshop, her silver eyes reflecting the shimmering lights of New Providence. But there was a distant look in her gaze, one that didn't seem to belong to the person she had become. "Ilara?" Dorian asked gently, stepping up behind her. His voice was soft, careful, knowing that she carried more than just the weight of her enhancements. She turned to face him, her expression pensive. "Dorian, do you ever wonder if I'm just An experiment? A combination of broken parts that somehow work? I mean, I feel alive now, but there's a part of me that can't escape the fact that I was created, that I was made to be someone else's tool. Dorian's heart sank at the question. He had expected her to grapple with her past, but hearing her voice, the words that had been lurking in her mind struck a chord deep inside him. He crossed the room and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, turning her to face him fully. "You're not just a tool, Ilara," he said with unwavering certainty. "You're you. What you were made to be, that's not what defines you. I see you. Everything you are now, everything you're becoming. You're not some broken machine anymore. You're someone who deserves to choose their own path, and that is what makes you free." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time in days, a soft, genuine smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I want to believe that. But sometimes, when I look in the mirror or feel the hum of my systems, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever truly be free. What happens when the people who created me come back for me? What happens if they want me to go back to being nothing more than a tool again?" Dorian stepped closer, his face serious now. "Then we'll fight it. We'll fight them. They won't take you from me. You're not their property anymore, Ilara. You're your own person." Ilara's silver eyes softened at his words, a flicker of something more profound passing between them. For the first time, she could feel it, a connection that went beyond the physical, beyond the mechanical. It was something deeper, something she hadn't expected to find. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with a quiet emotion she hadn't been able to express before. "I don't think I can do this without you." Dorian smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "You don't have to do it alone. You never have to be alone again. I'm with you, Ilara." The silence that followed felt like a promise, one that neither of them needed to say aloud. But that night, as they lay together, their thoughts turned to the future, to the world that lay beyond the workshop and the walls of New Providence. The truth was, there were still many questions left unanswered. Ilara had found freedom, but it was a fragile thing, and the shadows of her past were never far behind. The next day, as the sun rose over New Providence, the calm before the storm lingered in the air. Dorian and Ilara went about their work, fixing more machines, repairing tech, but there was an underlying tension, a sense of foreboding that neither of them could shake. Deep down, they both knew that the peace they had found wasn't going to last forever. Then, as they were finishing a project late in the afternoon, a sudden knock at the door shattered the quiet. Dorian's heart skipped a beat as he glanced at Ilara, who immediately tensed beside him. "I wasn't expecting anyone," Dorian muttered, standing up from his workbench. As he made his way to the door, Ilara's eyes flickered to the shadows in the room, where her weapons were stored. She had been preparing for this day, when the people who had created her would come looking for her. She just didn't know it would come so soon. Dorian opened the door, and standing there in the doorway was a man dressed in fine military-grade armor. He was tall, his posture rigid with authority, and his face was stern. Behind him stood two other figures, both with cybernetic enhancements that looked strikingly similar to Ilara's. "I'm looking for Ilara," the man said, his voice cold and professional. "I represent Thalax Industries, and I have come to collect what is rightfully ours." Dorian's stomach clenched. "She's not going anywhere." The man's eyes narrowed as he sized Dorian up. "You don't have a say in this. Ilara belongs to us, and you violated the terms of her original contract." Ilara stepped forward, her body tense. "I'm not a possession," she said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "I was created, yes, but I've chosen my own path. Now, I belong to no one but myself." The man's expression didn't change. "You don't understand the consequences of your actions, Ilara. We're giving you one chance to come back peacefully. If you don't, we'll take you by force." Dorian stepped in front of Ilara, his chest rising and falling with steady determination. "You'll have to go through me first." The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Ilara could feel the weight of what was happening pressing down on her chest. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. But in Dorian's eyes, she saw something different. It wasn't fear. It was something more. Hope. Not without a fight, Ilara murmured, her silver eyes meeting Dorian's, a silent understanding passing between them. Dorian turned to her, his jaw set. Then let's fight for you. Let's fight for us. With that, they both stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. It was no longer just about surviving in a broken world. It was about choosing to live, to fight for what was right. And, for the first time, Ilara knew she wasn't alone. She had a future, and she would fight for it.